solidarity. So this was the foreign minister at the time from Taiwan, Ye Gongchao. In June 1955, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ye Gongchao, which over there, expressed his hopes that the friendship between Taiwan and South Vietnam could usher in a new era of what he called Asian people's solidarity. That essentially, the basis of that East Asian people's solidarity is Confucianism. He called for the creation of a Northeast Asian alliance that would include Japan and South Korea. So again, you have these four countries that will be sort of put together because they share common cultural heritage. There was a reference, there was an organization called the Asian People's Anti-Communist League. It's a bit of a mouthful. There's a lot of these kind of organizations that was going on at that time. So I'm very sorry if I can't even mention all these names. And many of these organizations got such long names. So the Asian People's Anti-Communist League had a branch called the ROC branch. They organized a forum also in 1955, and that forum called for greater cooperation, cultural and economic cooperation between Taiwan and South Vietnam. So the forum would talk about how Vietnam and China once had a common language, they had a common ethnicity, I'm not sure whether that's actually correct, but and they had a common border, right? So, and that both sides, that is China and Vietnam, were now attacked by international communism. So again, this whole thing about international communism, and the defense against international communism was Confucianism, right? In April 1958, Minister Ye met President Ngo Dinh Diem, the South Vietnamese president, in Saigon, and discussed possible avenues for cultural cooperation. Ye Gongchao actually called the president of South Vietnam, quote, a protector of Confucianism, and both men agreed that they need to combat, again, quote, the evils of communism, and to do that, the people of Taiwan and South Vietnam had to learn, or should learn, Confucianism. Now, President Chiang Kai-shek and South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem finally met in Taipei in 1960, and they signed a joint statement recognizing the common culture and common culture and traditions of China and Vietnam. The South Vietnamese president announced that Chinese studies and Chinese culture were being promoted in South Vietnamese universities, and there was a mission from the South Vietnamese Education Ministry who visited Taipei in 1962, largely to establish academic contacts, right? They want to establish academic ties between South Vietnam and Taiwan. The South Vietnamese Education Ministry also arrived in 1962 to collect rare books on Vietnam and visit several schools and universities, including the National Taiwan University and the National Taiwan Normal University. So, like this newspaper article, like I mentioned earlier on, it's really about how, when people look at cultural diplomacy, they try to look for something that can sort of unite various peoples through a form of common cultural heritage. So here you see Vietnam, China here means ROC, Japan and South Korea could sort of work together for a common cause. So, oops. This is going. I shouldn't press the button too hard because I think if I do that, whoa, there it goes again. It's not okay. 5. Very slow. Whoa. Whoa, it's now going on and on and on. sorry about this. I think I pressed too hard. It just went on and on and on. I wasn't pressing it. It just went on and on. Oh. Okay. Maybe next time I'll press the mouse. But anyway, yeah, I was just about. But I was about to come to this slide. So, Kong Decheng, right? He's a direct descendant of Confucius. So he followed the Kuomintang in 1949 to Taiwan. So now, due to his position as a direct descendant of Confucius, Kong Decheng became also a very key political figure for Taiwan. He was also a member of the National Assembly, if I remember correctly. So he really is a senior advisor to President Jiang Jiechi, so he's obviously a key person. Now, he was promoted by Taiwan to be a symbol of Chinese and East Asian culture. In terms of how soft power was used by Taiwan, he became an important symbol in the fight against international communism through the promotion of what he considered to be an East Asian cultural revival. Right? In September 1958, Kong Decheng made a highly publicized visit to Saigon, where he gave lectures on Confucianism, and he met the Minister for Education and other officials from the South Vietnamese government. His visit was promoted by both Taiwan and South Vietnam as a sacred duty. This is actually a word that he used. Sacred duty, because he would offer sacrifices to Confucius in South Vietnam. Right? The South Vietnamese government used Kong Decheng as part of a campaign to promote the view that Confucianism was to promote the view that communism was a destructive force of traditional Vietnamese culture that was linked to Confucianism. So, in other words, you either have one or the other. You cannot be both a Confucianist and a communist at the same time. Now they can combine. Very conveniently in China, you have Confucius institutes nearly everywhere, but they don't promote Confucianism. But as a direct descendant of Confucius, it became an honor to have Kong Decheng conduct the ceremony in Saigon to promote or to commemorate the birthday of Confucius. There was a reminder in the South Vietnamese press that Kong Decheng, there was a lot of trouble taken by the South Vietnamese government to invite Kong Decheng over to Saigon. So, in other words, what the press is trying to say is it's not easy to get this man to come to Saigon. And this man is a descendant of Confucius, so now that he's in Saigon offering sacrifices to Confucius, we should pay him the kind of respect that the descendant of Confucius should have. In a bid to showcase Vietnam as a center for Confucianism and traditional Vietnamese culture, the government of South Vietnam basically invited Kong Decheng to offer sacrifices, like I mentioned earlier on. Between the visit of Kong Decheng to Saigon and the assassination of the South Vietnamese president Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963, so between 1958 to 1963, the governments of Taiwan and South Vietnam preached the need to revive East Asian culture through Confucianism. This is, okay, I better use the mouse. Okay, this is a letter from the ambassador in Saigon, because by 1957, South Vietnam already established diplomatic ties with Taiwan, or ROC. So the ambassador in Saigon sent a letter to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs over here in Taipei. And the letter actually mentions that the South Vietnamese president, Ngo, Lin Jiang wanted to promote Confucianism as part of an Asian cultural revival. So kind of come back to the same theme of how culture would defeat communism. And in a letter, the ambassador mentioned that Taiwan or Zhonghua Minguo in the letter and South Vietnam belong to one cultural family, and that Confucianism should be revived in order to unite all these Asian countries, culturally. So Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and China. But in this same letter, the ambassador also mentioned that in promoting anti-communism, Taiwan could not afford to neglect military matters. So the idea of military assistance and all that came in as well. There's this red line here. Somebody obviously saw the importance of that point. And basically what it says is we should work together to promote cultural revival in Taiwan and South Vietnam. And there's also a note down there that says that the Vietnam Confucian Association president intends to visit Taiwan. So you can see the exchange that was going on at this stage.
We address Taiwan as Taipei外交部.
Yeah. They usually write Taipei 外交部, even Taipei 经济部, Taipei whatever. And I think it's just to say that this ministry is located in Taipei itself. For years, I mean, even until today, when people talk about Taipei, they think of the capital of Taiwan. And it was many years later, actually, I think when I was an undergraduate, that somebody told me, no, Taiwan is, Taipei officially is the provisional capital of the Republic of China, because the capital of Taiwan is somewhere in Nantou, I can't remember the name of it. Zhongxing Xinchun or something like that. So it's like, what? No. Yeah, but usually all the letters from government bodies, they usually start off with Taipei, something. And then the format usually is the same. I know in Taiwan, I'm not sure whether Taiwanese government still write letters this way. It's extremely formal. When I was learning letter writing, Chinese letter writing in high school, we will never write this way. I still receive letters from the Dangang Guanliju in Xinzhuang, right? It starts with Tai Tuan Yu, I was like, my dad received such a letter when I was still in Australia, and he told me, there's a letter from Taiwan for you. He said, oh, is it? Could you read it out to me? And he tore open an envelope and started reading the letter. Tai Tuan Yu, and then he burst out laughing. And he said, who writes this way? I said, obviously, the Dangang Guanliju still does. But these letters are usually very, very formal. And it's very straight to the point. I'm not sure, I don't think I have the whole letter here. This letter probably about 3 or 4 pages. And you can see there's point 1, it goes on. And point 1 comes in several points, so sub point 1, sub point 2, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a long letter. The gist of the letter is usually given in the front. And then they say, okay, now that I've said what I want, now that I got your attention, I'm going to give the details. So really, sometimes you can get away just by looking at the front, and you can see whether or not the document is important, because the front part usually would sort of highlight the content of the letter. This one in English, surprisingly from one of the archives, I think it should be Guoshi Guan. It's the ambassador of China here will be Taiwan, of course, ROC, to South Vietnam. So the president of the Vietnamese Association for Asian Cultural Relations wrote this letter to the ambassador. Basically, again, either the ambassador or one of his staffers decide that there must be critical points there. That's why there was a red line on there. So it's really a letter of introduction of the association to the ROC government. Also asking, inviting or introducing the organization to Chinese intellectuals, cultural associations, and you can see, supplying us, the point number 3, supplying us with documents on Chinese culture and so on and so forth. So it's all part of this cultural relations that Taiwan had with South Vietnam. So again, this one I just happened to find it again in one of the files. This one would be this one would be the Zhongyang Yanjiu Yuan, so the Jinshu archives. Right? So again, it's a big thing that Kong De-cheng managed to find his way to Saigon, and that he was there to promote Confucianism and so on and so forth. Now, this is a monthly. Now, there was an ambassador that will be based in Saigon, right? But every major city of South Vietnam, Hue, this one, they would have a consul or consul general, and many of these consuls would supply monthly reports back to Waijiaobu. And these monthly reports are actually important for me because they do highlight problems in the relationship between Vietnam and Taiwan, for instance, or they talk about the possibilities of cooperation, or they may bring up political issues in South Vietnam that could be of interest to the President Jiang Jieshi and his ministers. So in this case here, this report from the consul at Hue, the introduction actually talks about the history of the relationship between China and Vietnam and the potential future that both countries will have, but it's largely focused on cultural exchange, cultural cooperation. You look at the image on the left, the title of the report is there. Usually every report there will be a title, so it sort of draws attention to what they're going to say. And the whole report will talk about the kind of activities that both Taiwan and South Vietnam could promote for cultural exchanges, and they will largely focus on education and communications. So 交流, more and more this kind of academic communications that will go on. I can see over here. Now, sometimes there are also documents in I think Guan, which talk about how, for instance, South Vietnam wanted Chinese books, right? Books on Confucianism. If if Taiwan had Vietnamese language books, of course that would be better. But what they wanted were either rare books about Vietnam or books about Confucianism that they could then translate into Vietnamese and then disseminate to the wider reading public. So I have here written here that in early 1959, the National Broadcasting Corporation in South Vietnam sent a request for Chinese language textbooks. So you want to learn the Chinese language as well, and you learn it through these kind of cultural and educational exchanges with Taiwan. So in response, the Kuomintang sent or ordered the sending of large number of textbooks to South Vietnam. Now they say a large number, but there's no numbers given, so I don't know exactly how large it is. But clearly, if South Vietnam wanted Chinese language textbooks, the government here in Taipei would be quite willing to give them to Saigon. In 1960, when the South Vietnamese president visited Taipei, he actually told President Jiang Jieshi that because he wanted to promote Confucianism and East Asian culture, the Hui University actually organized an Institute of Chinese Studies. So again, it's more learning about China and everything Chinese, which if they needed help, they would turn to Taiwan. Now the thing is, for all these plans that the Taiwanese and South Vietnamese government have about cultural cooperation, now they sounded very useful, they sounded good. It's all to tackle communism. There is a problem for the Kuomintang when it comes to Vietnam. Now, since 1955, when President Ngo Dinh Diem became president, he basically introduced policies that discriminated against the Chinese people in Vietnam. So on the one hand, he is talking about how important it is to have cultural links and cooperation with Taiwan or China as he saw it. But at the same time, he introduced policies that basically discriminated against his own Chinese people. So for instance, in 1956, there were laws passed in Vietnam where if you are ethnic Chinese in Vietnam, you must have a Vietnamese name. You can no longer have a Chinese name, you must write in Vietnamese. You can only communicate in Vietnamese. Chinese schools were closed down. And everyone had to learn Vietnamese. Now all this in a sense is part of a nation building process. You can say that we are now independent, we are Vietnam. Why should so many languages be in Vietnam and not Vietnamese itself? That's probably President Ngo Dinh Diem's point of view. But because he had these anti-Chinese policies introduced, the Kuomintang at certain points, certain times, appeared to be rather uncomfortable dealing with the South Vietnamese president. So in this letter itself from the Kuomintang to the Foreign Affairs Minister, Shen Chang-Huan, basically talked about how all the things that was going on in South Vietnam at that time, about the South Vietnamese president's attitude towards the Chinese in Vietnam. And he also mentioned in this letter that the South Vietnamese government had dissolved several Chinese associations, and there were some negative reactions from the Chinese residing in South Vietnam. So there were domestic issues in South Vietnam that could wreck the relationship between Taiwan and South Vietnam. But as I mentioned earlier on, when Chiang Kai-shek and President Chiang Kai-shek and the South Vietnamese president looked at the bigger picture, it was anti-communism that was a bigger problem. So it's not as if the Kuomintang wanted to push aside all the discriminatory policies that South Vietnam had towards its own Chinese people. It's just that when they look at the big picture, communism was a bigger issue, right? So they really wanted to continue to maintain that cultural links. This is a report from the Federation of Overseas Chinese Associations. This is in Taiwan itself. Again, it's the same message that we have to try to promote some cultural understanding between Taiwan and South Vietnam. So again, on the image on the right, there are just 3 points there. Getting South Vietnamese Chinese people to study in Taiwan, to make a cultural agreement with between Taiwan and South Vietnam, and then promote greater cultural cooperation between both countries. So you can see the same thing is mentioned again. So this is an appendix to a letter from the same federation. So the Chinese name is given there, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which largely talk about the same thing. It's really the need to continue to maintain the cultural relationship. This one, okay, it's from the Consul at Hue to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's the idea that in Hue they're going to set up the Chinese Language Institute, Hanwen Xueyuan. So they mentioned about how there's a first batch of 40 students that will come in. Admission started in December 1959. Class will start in January 1960. And part of the plan was to encourage South Vietnamese people to visit Taiwan. There are other letters that more or less talk about the same thing. Now, this comes again to the point I made earlier about cultural diplomacy. If you want people to know what kind of country you are, you really want them to understand you better. One way is for them to learn your language, which is why you have the Hanwen Xueyuan. Another way is to get them to visit your country. So if they will come to Taiwan and look around Taiwan and they see what's going on in Taiwan, if they like what they see in Taiwan, they might go back home to Southeast Asia and tell people about just what a great and wonderful place Taiwan is. So it's really all part of this cultural diplomacy that was going on at that time. So in this case here, you have South Vietnamese students who wanted to enroll in universities and schools in Taiwan. I'm quite surprised that about these documents, because I found these documents in the Guo Shiguan, and they in addition to the names of the students are okay. So you have on the one on the left is a letter for Reverend Jin, who wants to study in Furen Catholic University. And the one on the right, you have students who wanted to study in Taipei First Girls High School. The thing about these letters is that along the letters were their personal information, which was not censored. So I could actually see information about these people. I'm not sure why is it that Guo Shiguan allowed researchers to be able to look at these people's personal background. But there were other documents where if you look up, you might see only the name, but then the address, for instance, there'll be a white tape over it, so you cannot tell where they stay. Now, where they stayed back in 1962 or whatever it is, that building might no longer be around. It didn't matter. So long as it's an address, personal information, they usually would sort of cover up with a white sticker or something, so you cannot see it. Now this letter from the Guojia Anquanju to Ministry of Foreign Affairs also highlights the difficulties in promoting that kind of cultural cooperation. So in addition to President Nguyen Dinh Diem's own anti-South Vietnamese Chinese policies, Vietnam also introduced what they call Vietnamization of Chinese schools. So like I mentioned earlier on, if you're a Chinese school in South Vietnam, at this stage, you either close down or you become a Vietnamese school. And students in these schools must learn Vietnamese language 28 hours a week. So it's really enforced, everyone, you better start learning Vietnamese. Okay, this is part of a letter. So this is actually the last page of a letter. Can't see how many pages there are. It's 27. It's a letter from the Education Ministry. So it's about how academics from Taiwan were invited to go to Saigon in South Vietnam for talks about Chinese culture, Chinese history, and so on, and to organize classes, right? So something similar with what's going on down here now. There's also mention about how Taiwan would give a gift of books about China and Vietnam to various South Vietnamese academic institutions and social organizations. So it adds on to that linkage between the two countries. And in this case here, the letter from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The interesting point for me here, I don't have to use a pointer, is this part here. Sorry, this part here, which talk about, I think is it teachers? People will be going to Saigon 每人每年工作费 I can't read. 美金300元. So they already tell you how much they will pay these people. And I think US $300 in 1962 is huge. So there are all these little details that will come out in some of these letters in the archives. So again, this is probably the last slide I have on cultural cooperation. So again, on the left is about Kong Ke-cheng visiting Saigon, and on the right is once again the idea that China or Taiwan is here to help with giving Vietnam, South Vietnam, the kind of materials that it might need. Now the second approach, which is basically the economic diplomacy part, is technical and economic assistance. Despite Taiwan being a recipient of American aid from 1949 to 1960s, while the foreign policy of Taiwan was centered on an anti-communist agenda, the Kuomintang government worked on the basis that the best anti-communist platform was the provision of technical and economic assistance to non-communist allies. Economic development went hand in glove with military posturing during the Cold War. While Taiwan provided military assistance to South Vietnam during the Vietnam War, it also met officials from Southeast Asian countries to discuss the possibility of Taiwan providing the necessary expertise and knowledge to develop Southeast Asia. So while I mentioned about how Taiwan and South Vietnam had this cultural cooperation, Taiwan was also involved with scientific and engineering projects in South Vietnam, for instance. One is actually the role played by Taiwan Power to assist the South Vietnamese government in Saigon generate electricity in the country. So you have the expertise to teach other countries how to go about doing that. So this. Okay, sorry, I should mention this earlier on. This is actually a letter from the Overseas Chinese Affairs Committee, the Chao Wei Hui over here in Taipei, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, asking that the South Vietnamese government recognize degrees from Taiwanese universities. So clearly, if you're going to send South Vietnamese students over to Taiwan to learn Chinese or Chinese history and so on and so forth, you want the students to go back to Vietnam with a degree that's recognized by the South Vietnamese government, right? So this is one letter for it. And in this case, this letter is about South Vietnamese students who want to apply for scholarships to study in Taiwan. Now, earlier I talked about the Sino, about the technical and economic assistance. So in this case here, it is a report that talks, if you look at part 2 over here, it's largely about how Taiwan could assist South Vietnam. So fertilizer plants and so on and so forth is part of this Sino-Vietnamese economic relations as in discussion as they work towards trade agreement between the two countries. So again, this letter is the ambassador in Saigon to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs calling for greater technical assistance. Now here the focus is on agriculture, forestry, and animal husbandry. So again, like I mentioned earlier on, if Taiwan had the expertise, why not do what you can to help South Vietnam? Now when it comes to Malaysia and Singapore, the situation is a little bit different. Taiwan cannot promote Confucianism in Muslim majority Malaysia, right? But the funny thing is that in Singapore, 75% of the population is Chinese. But you have sizable Malay minority in Singapore. So if you try to promote Confucianism in Singapore, it's probably not going to work. There'll be the Malays that will be upset in Singapore. Then in Malaysia, they will say, what are you trying to do? You create a Chinese outpost or something, close to Malaysia. So what the Taiwanese government did was to promote Chinese education, right? Students, especially Chinese students from Malaysia and Singapore, they could go to Taiwan for university studies, and quite a large number of students would go to places like Taiwan Daxue. In the 1960s, if you wanted a Chinese education, you could go to either to Nanyang University in Singapore, or you could go to Taiwan and study in National Taiwan University or the National Taiwan Normal University. Technical and agricultural assistance to Malaysia, again, is part of economic diplomacy. So Malaysia and Taiwan signed an agreement in August 1970 to develop each other's export processing zones. So what it was agreed upon was that Malaysia would send a delegation to Kaohsiung to inspect the export processing plants over there and how Kaohsiung exported its goods overseas. And in return, Taiwan would send a delegation to Malaysia to help Malaysia develop its ports. So it's sort of a kind of win-win situation for two sides. And earlier I mentioned about the Jinmajiang, films from Taiwan. Now these will have an appeal to Chinese in Malaysia and Singapore. If you really wanted to show how Taiwanese society was like, you'll be through the films. People will look at the film and go, oh, okay, so that's how Taiwan. Now it may not be the case that Taiwan was like that, but it's what you want people to understand Taiwan to be. So in this case here, you see, even from the Chinese press in 1957, you got 自由中国 over there. You have cultural troops, right, who come to Malaysia and Singapore. They will promote, music, art, drama, acrobatics, anything, to give the image that Taiwan is this place where China or the Chinese heritage was kept alive. After the Cultural Revolution, of course, many such performances were banned in China, so all the more Taiwan would send all these troops overseas to Southeast Asia to showcase Chinese culture. In 1959, this guy here, Li Hai-sing, he organized actually a Cantonese cultural troop to Southeast Asia. Now the letter that he sent to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not mention what kind of performances were done, or rather the details. All he did was to say how many people went and their travel plans. So you do get a sense that there's this thing going on. And while he's in Malaysia and Singapore, of course, he will send reports to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the situation among the Chinese in Malaya and Singapore. Which when I read through it, it's largely the kind of things that people would say about Malaya and Singapore at the time about the Chinese. So, Nanyang Daxue Xue, so on and so forth. So it's, the state of the Chinese community in Malaya and Singapore at the time. Now we talk about films. The importance of films that will be screened abroad to promote Taiwan. Now whether it's intentional or not, films will always have a political message. So I saw this picture from this book called 中国电影50年. You see Chiang Kai-shek president there, and all the directors and the China Motion Pictures stuff. The Jinmajiang was introduced in 1964, as I mentioned earlier, to highlight the best of films in Taiwan. And these were some of the films that were screened in Singapore. And I know they were screened in Singapore because if you look at the Chinese newspapers in Singapore, you find that the advertisements are all there. So they were screened, and many of them were popular. 八百壮士, although it's a war movie, there was a lot of comments by people who watched the movie about, you can either see as propaganda or the truth about what was going on at that time. And many of these films which won the Jinmajiang, I remember the last one, 打错车. And movies starring Qin Han and Qin Xia, there were so many of them that people actually in Singapore, actually people got tired of those films. I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen movies starring these two people. The movies are very, very standard. Okay, Lin Qin Han and Lin Qinxia usually would act as lovers who somehow never ever marry, or because one will die, one will get run over by a car, whatever, right? There's always this tragic love story intertwined with it. And there was one movie I watched where the characters portrayed by Qin Han and Lin Qinxia apparently quarreled. Qin Han got to his theater, went down the street of Taipei, got run over by a truck. Lin Qinxia went to see him, who was dying in hospital, and then they made up. But the thing is, for all the storyline is not really the crucial bit, right? For us outside Taiwan, when we look at such films, even if it's movies starring Qin Han and Lin Qinxia, it's a window to Taiwan, right? Oh, so Taipei got so many theater. Okay, how do we know that? You go to watch, all the movies, and then you get a sense of what Taiwan was like. Now, like I said, whether it's intentional or not, these movies, by focusing largely on Taiwan, would actually give people a sense of what Taiwan was like. And in a way, it suited the Taiwanese government very well. Okay, so this last bit here is largely some of the archives I found from Australia. These are from Australian archives. And the Australians are actually very closely monitoring Taiwan's interest in Southeast Asia. Right? There's a file that they have there called Taiwan's relations with Malaysia and Singapore, and all these documents you're going to see are from that file. So in this case here, this memo from the Department of External Affairs, which is like your Waijiaobu over here, they talk about how Taipei offers trade with Malaya and Singapore, and how the three countries should sort of try to work towards greater trade. And I will go a bit faster here because I suddenly realized it's 5:35. In this case here, this memo, somebody from the Australian embassy must have sent a note to the Department of External Affairs, which talk about President Jiang Jieshi, who on 9th of February 1963 strongly approves of Malaysia as a barrier to communist expansion, and Indonesia will inevitably become a completely communist country and will seek to cause even more unrest in the Pacific region. In a way, it sort of tells you how President Jiang Jieshi saw Southeast Asia, and there was a lot of documents in the Kuomintang archives, for instance, on Indonesia, because there's this sense that Indonesia, under President Sukarno, was not dealing very effectively with the Indonesian Communist Party, and therefore one day Indonesia could become a communist country, which is exactly what President Jiang Jieshi thought Indonesia would become. Of course, now when we look back, we know that never happened. There was a coup in 1966, supposedly a coup, and President Sukarno was then sort of overthrown, and you have General Suharto, who then became president. And Suharto was anti-communist, so the Indonesian Communist Party died in 1966. And again, more from the Australian archives. This is an extract from the China News up there. Again, it's about Shen Changhuan, who was the Foreign Minister of the Republic of China, who visited Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines, and so all the notes that was taken when Minister Shen Changhuan went to these places. So again, it's all about how these countries could try to promote greater diplomatic ties. This one, again, the same thing. I think I only have the first and the last page of this letter in 1965. So again, it's about how Minister Shen Changhuan had a conversation with the Australian High Commission in Hong Kong. And the kind of notes that were taken. And again, you see the thing that Shen Changhuan strongly condemned any suggestion that a two-China solution should be sought. By the late 1960s, as the PRC started to work towards entering the UN, some Southeast Asian states, including Singapore and Malaysia, were thinking of a two-China solution. So both ROC and PRC will have a seat in the UN. But then the Chiang Kai-shek's government refused to have a two-China solution, so you either accept the PRC or the ROC. That, of course, meant that eventually the ROC had to leave the UN. So even in this station in 1965, you're beginning to see the idea that maybe you could have both Chinas in the UN, but that was not to be. This is, again, you see Formosa's Minister for Communications visiting Malaysia. So the Australian Embassy or the High Commission in Kuala Lumpur took note of what was going on at that time and sent a note back to the Department of External Affairs telling basically the Department of External Affairs just what was going on between Taiwan and Malaysia as a result of this meeting. Again, relations with Formosa, the same thing. So all these are from Australian government or at least Australian embassy's view of what was going on between Malaysia and Taiwan. So all these ministerial visit from Taiwan to Kuala Lumpur will be taken note of, and they'll try to explain, what did the meeting achieve, right? They have to say what the meeting achieved so that the Department of External Affairs would understand the kind of relationship that Taiwan would have with Malaysia. So again, it's much the same thing, so I'm not going to say too much. Now, then in '65, the Australian High Commission in Kuala Lumpur sent a letter to the Department of External Affairs saying that, hey, there's now a military mission from Formosa. So you have Taiwanese generals and defense ministry officials who come down to Malaysia. And indeed, Malaysian generals did visit Taipei to meet the Guavangpu over here and the Taiwan Garrison Command that was in charge of martial law in Taiwan at the time. So what they noted was that the Malaysian government would buy 15,000 guns from Formosa for local defense corps of the territorial army. So this is like your home guard, the army that looks after like emergency to prevent looting and that kind of stuff. So they will be issued guns that were purchased from Taiwan by Malaysia. And then they also talk about how the Formosans, which is Taiwan, offered, they wanted to build an ammunition plant in Malaysia, but then that was considered outdated, so the Malaysian government declined it. And then you have another player, the British, who were responsible for Malaysia's defense. So the British, if I were to go to the British archives, I'm pretty certain they will also have something about this, right? Why is the Malaysian government buying weapons from Taiwan when we are here to defend Malaysia? And in this case here, this note in the debate, the Dewan Negara, which is like your upper house in Malaysia, there was a senator who said that, he spoke of the dangers of extending full diplomatic recognition to Formosa. So by the late 1960s, Malaysia was seriously toying with the idea that with all these technical assistance, there's military help from Taiwan, should we consider diplomatic ties? Malaysia was set up as a country in September 1963. As late as 1970, as I mentioned earlier, there was already an agreement signed between the two countries. So should we accept an ambassador from Taiwan in Kuala Lumpur? And this is a question that was to continue on discussing until 1974, when Malaysia decided to recognize the PRC. So for 9 years, this debate just went on. So this again is the same thing, it's a military cooperation between Malaysia and Taiwan. And the reason why this, in this case, this letter suggests that Malaysia was very wary of Indonesia, which is not surprising because when Malaysia was formed in 1963, Indonesia went on what they call confrontation. They went on a military campaign against Malaysia, not a full military campaign, but occasionally letting off bombs in certain parts of Malaysia and Singapore. And then you have commando raids in Malaysia and Singapore. So Malaysia was very wary of Indonesia. By 1968, of course, President Sukarno was no longer president, but Malaysia was still very wary of what Indonesia could do. And this letter, which is only the first page, if I remember correctly, would suggest that Malaysia probably wants weapons or military cooperation with Taiwan because of its concern about Indonesia. I find this letter interesting because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taipei sent to Zhang Zhongren in Singapore on 8th of January 1969, but the trade representative of the ROC was not set up in Singapore on March the